Thanks, Lee. Thanks, everybody. Hi, everybody. Happy birthday to Capital, kind of. Our congregation's founding meeting was on October 15th, 1995, 26 years ago. And our first service was 25 and a half years ago. I tell you this not only because I'm a historian, but because I feel that knowing our history will make us all better informed about where we came from and where we might be going. The blurb said that this was a history of a community, and that's because this is not the definitive history, and we are not the only community, but this is a history of a community. What has changed in these 25 and a half or 26 years, and what are we still doing the same? As the board contemplates returning to in-person services after a break of 18 months, this is a time to envision the future of our community. And today's story is about us. I intend to describe 3 eras, and hopefully this isn't like your high school history class that sent you to sleep. The 3 eras I'm going to describe are the time before European contact, when this land was inhabited by the first people. Second, I'll talk about early Unitarianism in Victoria because it's kind of fun and funny. And finally, how Capital started and who shepherded the early days. There are archaeological relics and oral traditions of First Nations people living here for at least 3,000 years. In the early 1800s, one of the largest native settlements in what is now British Columbia was along the smooth beach at Cadbro Bay. When James Douglas steamed past this place in 1842 to build a fort in 1843 for the Hudson's Bay, the purple camas flowers reminded him of England. Douglas set up Fort Victoria here because it is lovely. You might think that the foregoing does not have a lot to do with our congregation, but I want to honor the fact that local history did not start in 1843 or in 1996 with Capital, but rather 3,000 or more years ago. When did the Unitarian presence begin in Victoria? A visiting minister conducted Unitarian services here in 1871, but didn't stay to build a congregation. There are records of Unitarians in Victoria in 1909 and a Unitarian minister. We had a Unitarian minister from 1911 through the First World War until 1919, and then lay led until 1927. Now, I'm not sure why the congregation shut down after 1927, but it would be 25 or so years until 1950 when a new group began with a monthly discussion meeting in psychiatrist Douglas Alcorn's office and in members' homes. Alcorn called it the Liberal Religious Fellowship of Victoria and sent out to have a charter from the American Unitarians. The American Unitarian Charter came back, and the name on the form was Unitarian Fellowship of Victoria. The group remained small, numbering 14 to 17 people. But in 1958, there was a charter registration that recorded 38 new members. This group met in rented facilities around the Seamen's Hall at 106 Superior Street in James Bay. The first settled minister was Reverend Marvin Evans. And in 1963, the church changed its name to the Unitarian Church of Victoria, and a group of Unitarians bought the Seamen's Hall for $30,000. The Unitarian Church of Victoria occupied 106 Superior Street from 64 to 92. How many people know where the Seamen's Hall is? Wave your hands. So it's a restaurant now called Il Covo. Let me get back to my script. Stan Sears was a minister from 85 to 89. For the next 18 months, the congregation was lay-led, with sermons also by visiting ministers and by Felix. The Reverend Dr. Philip Hewitt was the interim minister here in 91, 92, even while he was the minister in Vancouver. There was a lady who had moved here from Ottawa. Her name was Connie Harrison. She and her husband had retired to Victoria and become active in Unitarianism. Harold was in the Rotary Club of Oak Bay with the painter Ted Harrison, famous for his Yukon, beautiful, brilliant Yukon paintings. At a Christmas party in Oak Bay, Connie told Ted about Unitarianism, and Ted said, sounds like something I should try. So Ted was a member of our congregation for many years. Michelle Poirier, who comes to Capitol every now and then, went to the Superior Street Church back when her first daughter, Adrienne, was an infant. Michelle tells me that she felt immediately at home when she walked into a gathering of Unitarians, and she valued the childcare that the church provided. In 1992, Bruce and May Partridge arrived from Hong Kong. Bruce was a university administrator, and May was a professor of sociology. They began attending services on Superior Street. 1993, and I won't keep doing clothesline of dates, but in 1993, the Reverend Van Knight arrived for what became an 8-year hitch. He was so popular that the Superior Street building could no longer hold the services. I talked with Suzanne Dearman, who lives in Oak Bay. She said that in Van Knight's time, we grew to 3 services a week, 2 services on Sunday, and a fellowship-style discussion gathering on Thursdays that included a potluck dinner. There were 120 kids in the Sunday school, all born in the late 1950s and early 1960s. And that's how the Unitarians outgrew Superior Street. Now, a bank wouldn't give a church money or a mortgage without quite a sizable down payment. So the Unitarians sold the Superior Street building and then moved for a while into the Metropolitan Church, which is now the Victoria Conservatory of Music. There's a hall at the side of the conservatory, and that's where the Unitarians met for about 1.5 years. The Metropolitan Church, their numbers were descending and descending, so they moved into the United Church just up the street and became First Metropolitan United Church. So the Unitarians happily bought the Wellness Institute on West Saanich Road, but Saanich wouldn't give a church-specific occupancy permit, and that's why we stayed in the Metropolitan Church for as long as we did. Finally, all the Unitarians in Victoria were able to move into the former Wellness Institute on 5.5 acres of land on West Saanich Road. Bruce Partridge, I mentioned, the university administrator, got involved in planning the move of the congregation. And in June 1995, May Partridge and Diane Brown organized a symbolic walk to carry the flame from Superior Street through Victoria and up to the new rural location. But all was not well. During that year, a crucial year, 1994, the big move to the new building, but the congregation almost came apart. There was an argument about the receipts that the director of religious education should have had for food for kids for a program. And in that, one person accused another person of maybe lying about things, and lots of fingers got pointed. And in that finger pointing, the half of the congregation half of the leadership of the Unitarian Church resigned, including the Partridges and a few other families. I realize I'm wiggling the table because I'm bouncing up and down. So I'll try and stop. Thanks, Dick and Kathy. And I'm just so excited about history. So notwithstanding the beautiful building, lovely location, full-time minister, and 45 years of history, the West Saanich location was difficult to reach for many of the Unitarians who lived in James Bay and didn't have cars. In 1996, one of those members, Margaret Lovesey, prodded Connie and Harold to start a congregation in James Bay. May Partridge told me she remembered Dave Spearman saying, "How hard can it be to start a new Unitarian congregation?" So in 96, 4 Unitarian couples decided to form a group near the old Superior Street location. Those founding members were Evelyn and Frank Buell, Dave and Jackie Spearman, Harold and Connie Harrison, May and Bruce Partridge. They called themselves the Pieces of 8, and they had their meetings in the Bent Mast Pub, just near where Capitol usually meets in the pre-COVID time. A few other couples joined, and Maria Nyland, who is still involved at First Church, got in on the action. It happened that Harold and Connie were on the board of the James Bay New Horizons Center, and Harold and Bruce negotiated terms for the rental every Sunday. And I'm I should be delighted. We should all be delighted that they made such a good deal that we kept the same rental rate for 20 years. So there was great excitement in March of 96. One of the families went to Seattle to buy hymnals for our congregation. Connie was in Ottawa visiting family and was visiting with a couple who had just retired from the Federal Civil Service, Rustam and Leen Patel. Connie said, "Come to Victoria. We're starting a new congregation. You should come." So Rustam and Leen moved from Ottawa to Victoria and joined the Capital congregation 2 months after it formed, along with Patricia Tilley, whose daughters Meg Tilley and Jennifer Tilley were both already actors in Hollywood. So in March of 96, with 50 members, Capital Unitarian Universalist Congregation was official. And that's what I'm celebrating today. We had a social responsibility committee. We got involved in rallies for peace and the environment. When gay pride parades started each June, the Unitarians were there. We had banners. We had a choir. We had no minister and no plan to call one. So Saoirse McEwen was appointed our first lay chaplain. In 1996, our choir was 14 singers, led by Ian Riddell, with Dr. John Limbert at the piano. In 2003, John's wife, Lynn, brought her sister, Lee Waters, to a Capital potluck. Lee started attending a few years ago, and today she's our service leader. Meanwhile, while Capital was forming in James Bay, out at First Church, the magnificent sanctuary was built, and they changed their name from the Unitarian Church of Victoria to the First Unitarian Church of Victoria. So far, what I've told you is historical. I've told you who started Capital, when they did it, and why. We've celebrated on many new member Sundays. We've heaved sighs of relief after 25 AGMs and 25 budget approvals. And we have mourned at many celebrations of life. Next, I'm going to talk about stewardship. It's not enough to set a sandwich board on the sidewalk and to put a few chairs down. As many of us can tell you, the business of running a congregation can also be hard work. But it all has a joyful purpose, and that's why we do it. Stewardship centers on the notion that we do not own this congregation. It is not ours to buy or sell. We are taking care of it for future generations. 24 years ago, if the original Pieces of Eight wanted simply to have a Unitarian discussion in James Bay, they would have met in someone's home or at a restaurant. But they wanted more. They wanted to build something that would last. And that's stewardship. In the spring of 2001, this congregation almost fell apart, but a group of committed individuals worked together to keep things going. Connie, Bruce and May, Ben Dolph, Victoria Forsch, Michelle Poirier, Norma Tenner, Shirley Maserow, Leen and Rustam Patel, and Alan Dawson and Elizabeth Atchison were the ones who kept the chalice burning. Not just for themselves, but because they saw the benefits for the community if Capital continued to exist. Two other things came out of that near collapse in 2001. The Forum came out of that, and the Reverend Frances Deverell came to serve us for a few Sundays, and she introduced us to conversation guidelines that she developed when she was working at Beacon Unitarian, and we still use those conversation guidelines. To steward this congregation, to nurture and care for it, the leaders of the day decided to concentrate on at least three areas: to make Sunday services as good as they can be, to make sure our financial house is always in order, and to make sure the routine administration gets done. Now, I'm not a big believer in the power of prayer, but if I had been here when we needed a finance person and an administrator, I would have prayed to get the Tarlings. Just when Capital Congregation needed them, Amanda and Graham and 3-year-old Gemma moved here from Kingston, Ontario, ready to start a new life in Victoria. Graham likes to do finance stuff, and Amanda is an accomplished administrator. The board hired Amanda to be clerk admin, and Graham was the volunteer treasurer. The reasons for the large population of First Nations people here for millennia included the abundant salmon in the water, the abundant camas flowers and their starchy bulbs, and the abundant warm weather. Many of us are transplants to Victoria for some of the same reasons. At the end of this service, as is our custom, we will sing the linking song. We'll take a short break before convening for our forum, which is one of the best things about Capital in my eyes. During the forum, let us share more of Capital's history, but mostly I hope we can talk more about Capital's future. Let's look at Capital today, specifically at what groundwork we have laid for our future. In this talk, I described 3 eras: the time before European contact, when this land was inhabited by the first people; second, early Unitarianism in Victoria, and how Capital started and who shepherded the early days. For 3,000 years, the Lekwungen people thought James Bay was lovely and worth working for. In 1843, the Hudson's Bay Company thought that this place was lovely and worth working for. 26 years ago, 8 Unitarians felt that they needed to steward a renewed UU presence in James Bay. And today, with a clear sense of why we are here as a religious community, and with visions of our work and worship in the context of decades of UUism in the neighborhood, we look forward to continuing this Capital community. As the board contemplates returning to in-person services after a break of 18 months, this is a time to envision the future of our community. Today's story is about us.